Hello and be welcome to this panel on Be Future Festival. I'm very happy we meet here today, and I'm very happy to have you here. I'm Claudia Rittel from Bonn Institute, and I'm very grateful that we can be here in Design Offices today to have this interesting talk in the next 45 minutes. It's on the issue how to confront bias in foreign reporting and aim for fairness. So how do we get more fairness in foreign reporting? We have two panelists and one moderator here. On the panel we see Laura Postma. She is a PhD candidate at Leiden University and actually researching especially the changing role of foreign correspondents. Is that correct? So nice to have you here. And then we have Zahra Uddin. She is a journalist from Pakistan and a deputy editor of Unbiased the News. Nice to have you here. Then we will be the panel will be moderated by Sham Jaff, my nice colleague from Berlin, who is well known for her newsletter that covers unseen news from the last week from the whole world. What happened last week, it's called, and it curates overlooked news from the global south. At Bonn Institute, she is senior consultant for projects and research, and now the stage is yours. It's just to me to let you know that this panel is going to be recorded and it's going to be put on YouTube in the next weeks. So whoever you would like to tell about it, you can share the link in a little while. So the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for coming. I'm going to have my phone with me a little bit because I've put down some notes, but I hope that will be okay. I'm so glad that these two esteemed journalists here have joined the panel. As you can see, this is an old name. My colleague, I used to work with her, Alena Jabarine, unfortunately has fallen sick, but she's so brave and generous to just come here. I asked her, she said yes. And actually, Zahra, I'm so glad that you are here because you and Alena would have kind of complementing each other's views a lot. Yes, thank you so much. And I actually came up with this panel. I wanted to talk about foreign reporting. I wanted to talk about how foreign reporting is how foreign reporting works and doesn't work, basically, in the Western world. And I really want two things from this panel. One, that we all kind of get on the same page on what doesn't work. And then second, at the end of the day, hopefully, go home and have some ideas on how to do that better. With that, I would love to give Laura the stage, because Laura has prepared a keynote, a small keynote to kind of lift us off together. I'll pass the floor to Laura.
Thank you. No? Okay. Yes, thank you very much for having me here. And I'm really excited to kick off this panel with a topic I'm really passionate about. That's why I'm doing research on it. So I'd like to start this with giving you two examples. On October 12th last year, an extremist in the Slovak capital of Bratislava shot and killed two men in a gay bar, and one woman was seriously wounded. And the 19-year-old shooter later also killed himself. On November 19th, just a month later, a shooting at an LGBTI plus bar in Colorado Springs in the United States killed 5 people, 18 were wounded, and the 22-year-old shooter was later arrested. Now, what these two events have in common, I think, is clear. Where they differ has to do with the position these two countries have in the world hierarchy, and I'll tell you more about that later. But the shooting in Bratislava hardly received any attention in the media in the Netherlands, where I'm from. If there was any attention at all, it was mainly short news in mainstream media and some newspapers, but nothing about the shock and the demonstrations that it caused in the country, nothing about the discussion that it sparked about the barely existing gay rights in Slovakia. And then Colorado Springs, on the other hand, received a lot of attention. In addition to the hard news, we got to see and read a lot of sad atmospheric images, witness statements reported on by Dutch reporters who were on the spot to report on it. Conclusions: the United States are important, Slovakia not so much. And that is the hard conclusion I can draw after having been a foreign correspondent in both countries. And when I worked in the US, almost everything, especially if it was coming from New York, was considered newsworthy. And when I found myself in Prague a few years later, covering mainly the Czech Republic and Slovakia, I found out that this region is not very high on at least the Dutch news agenda, but I can claim it for Western European media as well. I learned that the US, for example, geographically further away, is actually considered culturally closer or at least more familiar to us, and that matters in international news selection. I learned also that every country east from Germany is still considered the Eastern Bloc, that the knowledge about this region, about the Central European region, is fairly low and mainly based on stereotypes. So my personal experiences being a foreign correspondent in these countries got me thinking, like, how do media organizations select their international news? And what are the most important criteria they implement? And mainly, is there room for change? Because media do have an influence on how we all see and not see the world around us and what we know about it. So this led me to my PhD research at Leiden University in the Netherlands. And it offered me the chance to dive deeper into theories on international journalism and explore what's possibly behind our Western European international news selection agenda and how that affects also the work of foreign correspondents. And one of the most striking theories I came across was the so-called world system theory. And I won't bore you with all the scientific details around this theory, but what I do like to share here is that this theory was already established in 1974 by an American sociologist called Emanuel Wallerstein. And this world system theory suggests that the world is arranged based on countries that are important, not so important, and not important at all. So they are divided into the core, the semi-periphery, and the periphery. And later on in 1998, another academic, Tsenkyo Chan, researched this theory and implemented it on journalism. And Chang hypothesized and proved with his research that the amount of attention a country receives actually depends on that category it belongs to. I think it's a fascinating study, especially to read it, the one from 98, almost 25 years after its publication. Because I think what we are now able to conclude is that even though especially since 1974, but also since 1998, the world has changed a lot. But our world order has remained more or less the same. The example I gave from Slovakia and the United States kind of demonstrates this. So do we need to change this? I think yes. Because the world system theory, or at least the hierarchy of countries that we use, still defines where most foreign correspondents are stationed, and therefore where we get more interpretation and more stories behind the news from. But that also means that we are missing a lot of stories from so many parts of the world. And if we want to understand the world we live in better, we need to turn actually our whole international news upside down, I think. We need to assume, as journalists, as media organizations, that our audience wants stories from Namibia and Uruguay just as much as they want it from the United States or France. And we need to give more attention to more countries, and we can talk about how we can do that. So we need to bring also more different and diverse stories in order to learn, for example, that the Eastern Bloc does not exist anymore, and that Africa is a continent and not a country, and overall that the world is more diverse than we think. So I hope we can come with some questions, but mainly with some answers here in this panel today. Thank you.
Thank you. I love the call for we need to turn everything upside down. Makes it all very busy. We talked about this before. Foreign correspondent for 9 years. You also were in the States, foreign correspondent. And and then you went into research. It's not really typically how foreign correspondents kind of evolve. Why go into research? Can you tell me a little bit about like a moment in time where you're like, I need to research this more. This is not right.
Well, it was mainly after my degree in journalism, I did a master's in American Studies where I learned a lot about American cultural and political influence in Europe and how that works, which was really fascinating to learn. So already then I realized the importance of, well, in this case, the United States, but in general of certain Western countries. And but the true click came when I, after the United States, went to Prague. And I wasn't able to sell certain stories where I was convinced that these are actually good stories. But the responses I got from media organizations constantly, mainly in the Netherlands, but I also worked for media in Belgium and in Germany, was it's too far away. And I never understood that. It's like, what do you mean with too far away? It's right around the corner. It's happening practically next to us. We should know about this more. But it was considered, like I said before, that Eastern Bloc kind of thinking as, you know, a lot of countries as the same. And it got me thinking, why is that? Why do we know so little about a region that is so close to us? And I started paying more attention to this. And then I was also talking to colleague correspondents, and I realized, wait a minute, why do Dutch mainstream media and a lot of Western European media have one correspondent to cover the entire African continent? What is that about? How is that even possible? So I was developing more and more questions, and I realized maybe I can find them if I do more research, or at least I can find some theories that will be able to answer these questions and hopefully also eventually come with a solution.
You're nodding your head a lot. Zahra, at Unbiased the News, I think you are working under very similar assumptions about the news industry.
I could relate a lot to everything you were saying. Like people question or say, oh, that's too far away, but at Unbiased we love what's far away. Like our focus is on what's considered far away. And majority of our stories are from places that are just really underreported. And for us, that's been the main focus.
I was gonna tell us a little bit about Unbiased the News. How did it come about? What do you do differently? And maybe also because you said put up a little bit of an article and like maybe walk us through it.
Sure. So basically, we are our organization is called Hostwriter, and we are a nonprofit based in Germany. We provide a platform, like an alternative to social media, where only journalists can sign up. And our main goal was to have journalists to basically just communicate with each other, talk to each other, and work together. Fast forward a couple of years, and then COVID happened, and we were in a bit of an existential crisis. And everyone at our organization has some level of journalism or have a journalism background. And we thought to ourselves that we have been talking so much about what we would like to change in journalism. All of us have had experiences that were biased. So why not use this opportunity to have our own newsroom where we tackle the challenges that we've seen in newsrooms that we've worked in, and work with journalists that we feel deserve to have a voice but are not being given a voice by newsrooms all around the world because they, like you said, because they think it's too far away. But the fact that it is far away brings so much perspective. It opens a whole new world in journalism as well, because right now, globally, we're dealing with so many issues that we are facing together, far away or not. We are all dealing with those issues, and it's really important to collaborate and connect on those and be able to tell a bigger picture.
And this is one of those projects, right? You've done a global cross-border investigation.
Yes, this is like our baby. So the Sinking Cities project happened when it's kind of a fun story, but again, this is also why we talk so much about having diverse voices in newsrooms, is because, so in our team, I'm from Pakistan, I have a colleague from the US and another colleague from Nigeria, And the three of us were sitting in the office and we were talking about coastal cities. I'm from a coastal city, so we were just talking about the recent floods that happened. Every year there's a flood in Pakistan. This year there wasn't, which was also like, oh, that didn't happen there? How? What's going on? But anyway, sorry. Yeah, so we were talking about how our coastal cities managing what's going on, how our coastal cities around the world managing sea level rise, and we decided that it would be very interesting to work with journalists based in those different cities. We wanted to have a more global point of view than just Western cities. We wanted to focus entirely on what is considered non-Western or the global South, even though I hate the term global South.
Same.
But so yeah, we have Karachi, Pakistan, Dhaka, Bangladesh, Alexandria, Egypt, Lagos, Nigeria, Dublin, Ireland, and then we put in Rotterdam because for us also it's important to provide a solutions aspect to our stories and in our projects. So we wanted to see how a city like Rotterdam is dealing with sea level rise. What are their practices in maintaining that? And is there a way that these other non-Western cities can employ that in creating safer cities for people? So these are some of the articles that we worked on, and for us, it was really important, like, because for us, this is foreign reporting, right? But it was really important for us to have this call for pitches for basically asking journalists based in those cities to report, because we didn't want to just send someone we knew to one of those cities. For us, it was really important to have the perspective of journalists who have been working in those cities, because they obviously have access to, or they provide context that journalists from other countries would not be able to provide. These are journalists who have lived there or grew up there or have been working there, and it was a really amazing experience for us as well at the newsroom to work with these journalists, because even though we started out with a certain image in our mind for how this project will be, after working with local journalists, we realized that, wow, there's so much more to this project, so much more to this topic than we thought when we started out.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, you can go to their website, unbiasednews.org, to read more about that. I mean, you said they were written by people who have a special connection to the place, have lived there for a long time, or stationed there even. Foreign correspondents usually, most part, they don't have that special connection. And I mean, foreign correspondents have kind of always played a very important role, if not really crucial, to foreign reporting. Sometimes, I mean, I still see it on the New York Times, whenever you go on an article about one of those countries, and it's like, this editor is covering, and then X, it's like so many different countries. And there's so thousands of languages sometimes that they are also supposed to cover. So something's wrong there. And today also a lot has changed, right? So there's globalization, there's the internet, there's social media. I know you might be laughing and like, this is not new, but 20 years or so is not really a long time for all these changes. So that has also changed the role of the foreign correspondent, or also how foreign reporting is being done. Can you tell us a little bit about those changes, maybe?
Yeah, they're quite fascinating, I think, because like you say, the role of the foreign correspondent did change. Because in the past we needed the foreign correspondent to tell us what was going on in a certain part of the world, right? Like we didn't know through our phones, like you said, or through the internet. So it was crucial that a foreign correspondent was based somewhere. And the foreign correspondent has also historically always had this kind of, it has always been a very prestigious job. Meaning that the job, and that's actually still the case a lot today, goes to experienced journalists who have already, done a lot of work in the past and who kind of earn this job, mainly if it's for important posts like Washington, London, you name it. So there is a certain air around the foreign correspondent of being the expert. And that's how a lot of mainstream media still present their foreign correspondents, even though now the world has changed and we don't need the foreign correspondent anymore to tell us what's happening. If a flood happens, maybe surprisingly in Pakistan tomorrow, since it didn't happen, we don't need the foreign correspondent there to tell us that it's happening. We will find out about it. What we would want a foreign correspondent to tell us is the stories behind the news, to give the right interpretation and so on. But we cannot have foreign correspondents in every country, and that is fine. The problem is when we put correspondents in regions and expect them, like I said, to cover an entire continent or huge regions. I know already from experience, having been in the Central European region, that even covering 4 countries is already a lot. So let alone covering a continent. It's not possible, and we cannot expect foreign correspondents to do that, to be an expert on so many different countries. The problem is when mainstream media still present it that way, as if this person magically knows everything. And I think the solution exactly is here, is working more with local journalists. Foreign correspondents work a lot with so-called fixers. But the whole thing, the term fixer already sounds like it's like an assistant, whereas most of the time it's actually local journalists, people who do journalism work and who deserve to be credited for that as well. And so instead of trying to put a foreign correspondent with the Western look into every country, we might, that's what I mean with also turn it upside down, work more with local journalists and trust them that they are also able to give us good stories, that we don't need always that national lens in order to bring a story to the audience.
I mean, one of the more common terms that is also being dropped in that conversation is parachute journalism, which just means that you just drop someone by parachute into a country. They have no clue what's going on, maybe they a little bit, and then they get fixed up with local journalists that are supposed to tell them a lot about what's happening, and then they are. And that's also something that a lot of times people say in defense of foreign correspondents. They say they're ambassadors of our countries. They will translate what is happening in that other country. They will translate it for the audience of our country. What do you think about that defense?
Yeah, we really hate the word fixer at Ghostwriter. It's not our favorite word. And yeah, generally we have seen a lot of, in our experience at Ghostwriter and people who have unfortunately worked as fixers, a lot of the times who you're referring to as a fixer, most of the time they work for the top news organization in that country. They're putting in a lot of their energy to be with you the whole day, take you around, share their sources with you. Basically, all of the work that you're supposed to do as a journalist, this journalist there has already done for you. And most of the time, they don't even get credit. Like, how many times do you see the name of the so-called fixer in the story that this foreign correspondent is publishing? If there's breaking news happening somewhere, you don't see the name of the person who got you to talk to the important people that you needed to talk to in that country in order for your story to be, well read or have the kind of relevance that it had. So yeah, that's kind of basically how I feel about parachute journalism. And also, of course, it was difficult 20 years ago, sure. But now, like, there are platforms like Ghostwriter, for example. If you want to cover the recent earthquakes in Morocco, go to our website, sign up, and then in the search you can write Morocco and it will show you every journalist on our platform based in Morocco. I mean, it's really that easy to work with local journalists, so I don't see why that's not happening more.
If I may add, I worked as a fixer as well. Being a foreign correspondent in Prague, I was working with Dutch journalists who were correspondents based in Berlin, but they were covering next to Germany, which is already a full-time job in itself, they were covering Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, Austria, and Switzerland. So obviously you cannot expect the correspondent to come to the Czech Republic and start reporting on a story where, you know, again, no criticism to the correspondent, but you cannot know. So I was doing all the work, like you say, research, production, setting up the interviews. I was often also doing the actual interviews because I spoke the language. But yeah, there is no credit for that. And it's not, I don't think it's about wanting, you know, your name out there or having the ambition to be the one in front of the camera, but it needs to be transparent that what I said before, it's not the magic correspondent, the expert on everything. No, there's people working very hard to make that story happen, and that I think the transparency part is important.
We have only 15 minutes left of this conversation. I also don't want to take up too much of the time because you might have some questions. Good, I have one. Do you want to ask it now? We could also do that. Okay, great.
Thank you very much. I would like to follow up with the question you asked before what's your name again?
Laura.
Laura, okay. Yes, you left journalism to go to research. And you said you criticized a little bit the fact that, for instance, a correspondent is working or reporting on several countries, foreign countries, and so on, and also the perspective. So I would like to ask you, is there any difference in research that concerning the perspective that Western institutes have on other countries? Because, of course, in journalism we see the perspective is Western, yes, okay, but is it different in research?
Not so much. Actually, a lot of the research that I found on international journalism is done in the United States. So it's very much done on the interest in foreign news in the United States, or where are most American correspondents stationed. So you see in a lot of articles the focus is on the United States, although also a lot of research has been done in Germany, actually, a little bit in Scandinavia, but as you can tell, it's all, you know, it's a Western perspective, which is an interesting aspect in itself, I think. So it is a starting point, but it is also something to notice. And I think it kind of also highlights all the questions that I had during I still work as a journalist, but now I combine these things. So that's actually interesting because it can kind of complement each other. But yeah, it's in the phase of the research I am now, it's very much focused on this. So considering the fact that I'm from the Netherlands, I'm now, a first study I'm working on is based on what's happening in Dutch mainstream media, but I'm very aware of the fact that it's in the Netherlands, it's Western Europe. So, I mean, more research needs to be done to get these different perspectives for sure. But with the focus being on Western Europe, that kind of brings me back to that world system theory. Like, this is where our priorities are currently. You know, this is what we call the core. And what about? I mean, it's also terrible to call it the periphery, but let's stick to the theory. Where is our focus there? So I think it's hopefully only the beginning of a lot of research that still needs to be done.
Maybe a better term would be global majority. Because it's not the periphery.
That's from 1974, this theory.
I mean, yes, to your point, research is not being done in a lot of non-Western countries, or is not being funded as much. And also, I wanted to also point out something that I've also noticed myself is when, for example, the digital news report that I really admire every year that comes out gives me so much information. But it doesn't really give me much about the rest of the world, the global majority, how news is consumed over there, what people really find interesting. It also doesn't really give me much information about marginalized communities living in Western countries. And then to think about that and to know that there are media decisions being taken based on this research. Yeah, makes my heart boil, but my blood boil. That's how you say it. Yeah, there's so much research that needs to be done. It's only the beginning. I'm glad that you're doing that.
Also, it's interesting to see how funds are allocated for this research. It's very easy to say, yeah, but research is not being done in those regions. But I mean, you have a lot of money for other regions. Let's just allocate that in our regions too. Like, come on, I know there's more to it than that, but I just feel like it's just a cop-out when they say that, yeah, there's not enough funding for those regions, because when it comes to funding, we're seeing so much repetitiveness in research, repetitive in the sense that there are only those specific regions that are being covered over and over again. There's always funding for those regions. I think it would be great to start talking more about how we need to put that funding in other regions as well.
Yeah. Let's talk about solutions, because I promised to get there at some point. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to naming what's not going right. So Zahra, perhaps I start with you. How do you think in Western media organizations, newsrooms better support local journalists? Because I know at Unbiased the News you do a lot. You go out of your way to really support them. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that process of what sort of support is needed to get them to really write those stories and to report on those stories.
So coming to what you said about Western media, Western newsroom or mainstream newsrooms, one of the things that they can do is, first of all, start off by just not just hiring your friends, hire other journalists too. It's okay. It's actually really great. And that's one of the things that we do. We have worked with majority of the journalists that we worked with at Unbiased News. We have not worked with them before. And I feel like that brings in a lot of great perspective. It brings also a great way to, work with someone, the kind of mentor-mentee relationships that we've built with our journalists, and how it has helped them, kind of use us as a jumping board and have more work in other newsrooms, for example. What newsrooms can do, don't hire friends, but also be open. There are a lot of journalists around the world. We are a community. We have to be there for each other. Already, there are so many statistics about burnout just in the field of journalism. It's because we're mean. Everyone is so mean to each other. And it's really important that we talk. It's really important that we have conversations. It's important to be able to collaborate with each other. Because without that, we're all kind of just slipping through the cracks of the media industry, and it's not helping the industry as a whole if we're just singling each other out and not looking at being more transparent and more open to working with new people all the time.
We also kind of assume that everybody else has the same resources that we do or has access to the same resources that we do, as in like everybody has an internet connection, everybody has the Microsoft Word on their program, on their computers, everybody has a computer. There are some countries in the world where Facebook is synonymous to being the internet. There are some countries in the world where you do not have access to the internet 24 hours a day, or to electricity.
Exactly.
And you do that too, right?
Yeah.
You also work with journalists who have limited access to the internet. How does that work?
So just to give an example of a story we did, we got a pitch from a journalist based in Kashmir. He was living in Srinagar, but not originally from there, but also being in Srinagar itself was giving him like some access to the internet. Because as you know, because of the political situation over there, there has been an internet blackout since a while. And interestingly, the story that he pitched to us was about disappearing archives regarding the history of the region. Because of this internet blackout and this lack of internet and internet censorship, there were a lot of historical archives that are being affected by the censorship, and they're basically erasing the history of the region. I felt like it was a really important story, and was grateful to have it on our platform. And also, it really kind of showed how it's important to work again with journalists based in certain regions, because it's not always possible for them to publish those stories where they're from. It would not have been easy for this journalist to publish this story in his country, because it was also not entirely safe for him, considering the backlash that you get when you're talking about censorship in your regions. This is something that happens a lot in Pakistan as well. So in order, like, having access to newsrooms in other regions or editors in other regions that can help you get your story out there, which you might not be able to do where you're living right now, it's also very, very important. So that is just one way that we felt that we can be of help, by providing our platform for journalists who are otherwise not able to do this. So yeah, he didn't have internet all hours of the day. When he did have internet was when we had our meetings online. Because at Unbiased also, we don't usually have that practice of, okay, you send us a pitch, great, send it to us by blah, blah, blah date. No, we don't do that. We just have as many check-ins as we can with our journalists, like actual phone calls or video calls, because it's really important to check in with the journalist about how they're doing while they're writing the story, and not just getting the story when it's done. We really like to have a back and forth during the production of the story as well. So yeah, he did not have internet access all hours of the day. So whenever it was possible was basically when I spoke to him, and eventually got the story. And of course, when we were deciding to take this pitch, we did take into consideration the fact that, okay, this story is coming to us from Kashmir. We would really love to run it.
And he's right, or he, I suppose, he was writing it in English.
Yeah.
English is not his mother tongue,
Yeah.
right? How do you bypass that?
In our newsroom statistics, even though 100% of all of our authors are writing from the region that they're based in, around 40% have English as their second language. And I really feel like this is where the role of us as editors comes in, because we have heard many times mainstream news organizations say that, English is not their first language, so, we're focusing on someone who can write for us in English, but how about we just do our jobs as editors? If their English is not good, or if it's not being written in a certain way, or if there are small grammatical mistakes, just be an editor, do your job, help them. It's also your job, your responsibility to shape the story in a certain way that is really showing that person's voice. And if you have the skills to do that as an editor, that is the mark of a good editor, how that story comes out when you're working with the person, instead of just shooting it down because they don't have the language skills for it.
Yeah. I was asking those questions provocatively, but yeah, there's some Western media organizations have that argument where they say, well, it's going to take too much time. They don't know. Even with German articles, there are some. For example, when the whole protests in Iran started, they were lacking in journalists who knew a lot about the country. And German media did a lot of many mistakes, as in also just copy-pasting what the government was saying basically about the protests. They were in need of people who knew about the opposition, who knew about resistance groups, who knew about so much. And those people were activists working in Germany who did not grow up in Germany, who didn't speak German as their first language. And so whenever these are friends of mine, whenever they proposed articles to the organizations, they were saying, sorry, we cannot run them, this is going to take too much time, and whatever. So what other people did, was to act as unpaid editors to them, so that they could actually write for those organizations. I'm not going to name names, but they are the huge ones.
If I may add to that,
Yes.
producing a story always takes time. It doesn't matter if you work with people in your native language or not. It always takes time, and it should always take time because you want to do things right. So that's not an excuse.
Yeah.
And now we have so many more opportunities and possibilities to work with local journalists. And also, like you say, to edit. I mean, if you will, use AI if you want to translate with editing. Very important to say that. But that's what I think is important to realize, is that in media organizations all the time talk about innovation. How do we, engage our audiences? Do we use TikTok? Do we use other ways? But innovation also needs to happen content-wise. It needs to happen like, this is what I meant before when I said we need to turn the world upside down, meaning media organizations, the mainstream ones, like to copy each other all the time. If the New York Times has it, we need it. The Guardian has it, we need it. But then you're stuck in this circle where you're always covering the same topics. And I heard an interesting remark before in a panel earlier today, which was about climate journalism, where behavior changes when peers change their behavior. So there needs to be a daring move by some mainstream media who are saying, we are going to do this differently. We are going to work with local journalists. We're going to take one of those 5 correspondents that we have in Washington, and one of them we're going to put somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and let's see what comes out of it. Like, I feel that's where, if you be a little bit more daring, maybe some will follow.
I was going to ask you that question, like, what do you think in your opinion? But yeah. That. Okay, we're now at 47, which means we're 2 minutes overboard. But if you have any questions to the panelists, there's another one. Yes, please.
Just to add something to what she said about the fact that media in Western countries used to say they don't have time, and that's why they don't want to interview, for instance, people speaking another language and so on. I think, yes, generally it is like this, but there are good experiences too. I usually try to convince them to, I'm working as press officer, and it was, I think, 2 weeks ago. They wanted an interview with a researcher, and I said, okay, it was VDR. And I said, okay, we have someone from West Africa who could speak about Niger. And they said, okay, for Nachrichten, it is not possible now because we have to, the broadcast is right now, but we are going to plan him for a background. So it is possible, I think, and there are some who are really open, and I just wanted to give this positive example.
I like it. We're ending on a positive note. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and warm applause for those 2 panelists, please.